Fresh off of the critical and commercial success of the first Legend of Zelda, Shigeru Miyamoto would go on to create a sequel that would release just 1 year after the original. And that game would be Zelda II, The Adventure of Link, for the Nintendo Entertainment System. This game did not originally start out as a Zelda game, but rather as a side-scrolling action game that Miyamoto wanted to make that used the up and down movements for attack and defense. It was planned as its own action game, but near the end of the game's development, it was decided that the story would instead take place in the Zelda universe. The game that they would develop would be known for its brutal difficulty, and when asked about this years later, Tadashi Sugiyama, the game's director, stated, "Games didn't have a ton of content at that time, so in order to have them played for as long as possible, we felt like we couldn't make them easily clearable." In fact, it actually sounds like a lot of what made this game what it is came from the limitations placed upon the developers by the hardware of the game, with Sugiyama being quoted as saying, "With the leveling system, there were various restrictions at that time, so we put in the level up system as a way to have players battling enemies time and time again." To say that this game is very different from the others in the franchise would, quite frankly, be an understatement, and is why many fans consider this to be a black sheep of this franchise. To start, as I mentioned earlier, there is a leveling system to this game, so you will be acquiring experience points from slaying monsters and collecting little pea or treasure bags found throughout the world. When you gain enough of this experience, you will level up and be able to increase your health, magic, and attack power. So, you could, in theory, grind in this game. There's also a lives system that would not return to the series beyond this point. You will start off with 3 lives, and whenever you die, you will lose 1 of your lives. You can gain more lives by collecting the Link dolls found throughout the game, or if you have maxed out all of your stats, you will acquire lives when you level up instead. When you run out of lives, you get a pretty chilling message notifying you about the return of Ganon, and you will be restarted back at the Northern Palace, which is where the game will start out at. In the overworld, there will be monster sprites that will pop up that, when encountered, will put you into a combat instance or an action scene where you'll need to leave the screen in order to continue progression on the overworld. A bit like random encounters in other RPGs, except you can easily see them on the overworld. There are also NPCs spread throughout the world in the various towns, replacing all of the random old men that would just give tips and advice in the caves or in the dungeons. This game would also have a New Game Plus feature, where you would be able to keep your level, magics, and sword techniques from one adventure to the next. Now, to jump into the story of the game, the story involves Link discovering a strange mark on his hand, with Impa shortly afterwards explaining that a third piece of the Triforce was hidden by the King of Hyrule in the Great Palace in the Valley of Death. Zelda was notified about its location, where the prince was not. Once the prince had taken over after the death of the king, he asked Zelda where the Triforce piece was, but she would not tell him or the magician. The magician would put Zelda into a deep sleep against the prince's orders. It is now up to Link to collect the Triforce of Courage from the Great Palace and wake Zelda, but he would have to be careful, as Ganon's minions are also on the lookout for Link in order to spill his blood and revive Ganon, explaining the game over a screen a bit. The story of this game is a bit more involved when compared to the first game, and overall pretty straightforward story overall, but it does its job. Now, with the story out of the way, we could jump into the game itself. But I do just want to note something real fast before we get into this. I have played this game before on the Game Boy, but I have never seen this game through to the end because of the difficulty, and I was a rather impatient child. I mainly want to throw this out there when I discuss the game's difficulty later on, just for a bit of context for everybody. But with that bit out of the way, let us go ahead and kick this off. You will start out at the Northern Palace, and you will see Zelda sleeping in the background. A bit of motivation for you on your journey. Once you head out of the Northern Palace, you will experience Zelda 2's overworld, where you will run from place to place, encountering monster sprites in the overworld, which will take you to combat instances like I mentioned earlier. And in these, you can either fight these monsters for experience points, or just leave the screen to return back to the overworld. There will also be secrets found in the overworld as well, that can be discovered by stumbling upon them, taking you to a special instance. You'll also see towns as well that you can go visit. These serve to restore your life with the lady in the red dress. And yeah, there have been many a juvenile joke made about these, because you aren't 100% aware how how she helps Link restore his life, but I will leave that up to everyone's interpretation. There will also be an old lady that will restore your magic, information to gather from the locals, and usually there will be an old man that will teach you a new spell. This first town will have them teach you the shield spell, for example. But yeah, the overall flow of the game will go like this. Travel the overworld, find secrets, battle monsters, level up, go to town to recover life and magic, and also learn a new spell, gather info, and then you will enter one of the mini palaces of the game. Talking about the palaces, let us go ahead and jump into the first dungeon, where I will explain a bit more on how the dungeons of this game are handled. Parappa Palace will be the first palace you will enter in the game, found in the desert area in the northeast after going through a cave. Now, while you can only go left and right on a 2D plane, these palaces can disorient you pretty fast if you are not paying 100% attention. This one, however, is not too bad to maneuver around. When it comes to the enemies, they will give you a bit of a challenge, as you'll have to engage them with attacks that are a bit more strategic in nature than what you would have done in the original Zelda game. For example, Iron Knuckles. They will be found within all palaces, essentially. These enemies will have a shield that will block normal slashes from the front, requiring you to jump slash them or just being very strategic with how you attack them. And there will be quite a few enemies like that in the game that will require you to think through how to handle each encounter, either with your sword or the magic the game gives you. It isn't groundbreaking or anything like that, but I personally like the extra challenge that comes with facing these foes. Well, most of the time, at least. Speaking of foes, you will encounter Wosu, bipedal wolf enemies that will constantly charge at you as you explore the palace. These are pretty easily dispatched with one hit from your sword. Stalfos, skeletal enemies that will use a shield and will require a crouch stab to take out. Bubbles, enemies that ricochet off of the walls and will steal health and magic from Link. Goomas, mace-throwing foes that will, well, throw maces at you. Bots, a slime-like enemy. Iron Knuckles, mentioned these guys already, but they are a knight-like foe that will attack you relentlessly and move their shield around to block your attack. And just like in the original, items will also be found in these palaces that will help you on your adventure. For example, the red candle item will be found here and will light up dark areas found throughout the game. And, once again comparing it to the original, bosses will also be encountered at the end of each of these palaces. And the boss of this palace will be the horse head, which, yeah, that is definitely a horse head. This guy isn't too bad, however. He will only attack by swinging his mace at you, which is pretty easy to dodge, and you can hit him by jumping and attacking his head. Pretty simple stuff. Ironically, I think the Iron Knuckles within the dungeon are more difficult than this guy, but regardless, a few slashes and he will go down, and you can grab the crystal. After clearing Parappa the Rappa Palace, you will head to Rudo Town, but only after acquiring the trophy from the cave in the desert to the north. In Rudo, you'll learn the spell Jump that will allow you to jump much higher than normal and will be greatly useful for traversal and dungeons later on. After that, you'll go through a cave in the south, and after that, you'll be at Midoro Swamp, and we'll meet up with Bagoo in the woods to the east. He will give you a note to show to the riverman in Saria. In Saria, speaking of Saria, a man will warn you that the eyes of Ganon are everywhere, which basically means that any villager you talk to there will have a chance to turn into an ache, a bat-like enemy. Find the mirror and give it to a lady in purple, and you'll be able to talk to the old man. That will give you the spell Life, which will allow you to heal yourself. A very handy spell, I will say. With Bagoo's note, the river guard will lower the bridge for you, which you will use to enter Death Mountain. And Death Mountain is quite a bit of a maze. You'll need to figure out which way to go in order to head out the other side of it while fighting tough foes on your way. This will be quite a challenge, but as long as you take your time, you should be good. Once you have escaped that nightmare, you will then head to Spectacle Rock off to the left and grab the hammer. This will allow you to make progress in some new areas, and then you'll head on out to the nearby town of Mido. And you know the drill. Get info, a new spell, heal up, But you'll also be grabbing a new sword technique here as well. The downward thrust from a knight in the town. That's right, just like with the Minish Cap and Twilight Princess, you will be acquiring new sword skills as well. I personally think the addition of learnable skills, sword skills in these games is a very cool mechanic, as it shows Link is not just getting stronger with more health or magic or items, but it's also improving as a swordsman as well, with these new techniques that he learns throughout his adventures. But aside from that, all that completed, you will now head to Medoro Palace, the second palace in the game. Now, Medoro Palace will have Iron Knuckles, Stalfos, the Bubbles, Bots, Mace Throwers, Raws, which are dragon head-like enemies that will fly around the screen, and you will have to try and avoid them or kill them before they knock you into death pits. Because it wouldn't be an NES game if there weren't some random flying jackass that basically existed just to knock you into pits. Ropes, the snake-like enemies that will now shoot fireballs at you, just because I guess they can do that now. And Moas, another enemy that will fly across the screen horizontally and just stay on your ass until you take them out. In this dungeon, you'll be finding the Handy Glove as well, which will essentially allow you to break rocks that you could not before. The boss of this dungeon will be Helmet Head. And once again, yeah, that is definitely a Helmet Head, continuing the straightforward naming conventions. With this guy, you will need to attack his head, and after a couple of hits, his helmet will fly off and start shooting fireballs at you. But just keep focusing on attacking Helmet Head's head, and you will emerge victorious. Overall, this dungeon isn't too bad to traverse and get through, but no, they will only get more difficult from this point onwards. After Medoro Palace, the next palace you'll need to head to will be the Island Palace. And this one can be a bit difficult to find, as you'll just need to stumble across a hole in the graveyard area. Which shouldn't be too hard as long as you start out from the King's Tomb area in the middle of the graveyard and then just head south. After a little bit, you'll eventually get a screen with Link falling, progress to the new cave you find yourself in using the fairy spell, and you will be at the Island Palace. Very aptly named, I will say, just continuing that trend. This dungeon will have Doom Knockers, which is just the coolest name for an enemy to have. Doom Knocker. Anyways, these guys will throw boomerang maces at you, which just makes these guys even cooler somehow. Armored Stalfos, Skeleton Man decided to get some armor to protect those weary bones. As you can imagine, these guys will take more hits and dish out more damage than their unarmored compatriots. Iron Knuckles, trust me, these guys are just everywhere. Bots and the Wolf Heads. These guys are also apparently just everywhere. The item you'll be acquiring from this dungeon will be the Raft, which will allow you to explore more of the world. The big bad here will be the Rebo-Knack, the first boss to not follow the, no shit, naming convention. A blue iron knuckle on a horse. Ironically enough, the easiest part of this fight will have you just hit him with a few downward thrusts while he's on the horse, and then he will jump off of it, which will be more difficult as blue knuckles are the worst to fight. But just do what you normally do against these guys, and you will be the victor. With that, the Island Palace is over. I will mention this more later on, but yeah, the game will probably start to kick your ass at this point in time. But don't worry, it doesn't get any easier from here. With the newly acquired raft in hand, you'll now be able to sail to Eastern Hyrule. Once you make land, you'll want to head to the town of Naburo. In here, you will acquire water for a thirsty red lady from the water fountain. Gross. But once you give her the water, she'll let you inside her house to acquire another spell. Fire, which will, of course, allow you to shoot fire, which will be required from this point on against certain enemies that you will now find yourself facing. After obtaining the spell, you will head north to a cave, and after passing that, you will head east to fucking Maze Island, which you just know sounds like a great time. The palace will be here, but you will instead first reach the far right side of the island and rescue a kidnapped child from a Lizalfos. After triumphantly raising the presumably terrified child in the air, you will leave Maze Island and head west from the island to the town of Darunia. Here, you will learn the upward thrust sword technique after breaking into a knight's house. Return the kidnapped child to the old lady after your stint of breaking in, of course, and you will be invited inside to talk to the old man and learn the spell Reflect, which will allow you to block things that your shield isn't able to. After that, you will, unfortunately, head back to Maze Island to go into the palace. I did not mention this earlier, but going through Maze Island is a slog, as there are unskippable action scenes spread throughout it, with fairly tough enemies found within them, like Tektykes, Basilisks, Lizalfos, Octoroks, and Boons, some of which will require that fancy new fire spell to kill. After trudging through that, you will arrive at the Maze Palace. And what a doozy this place is. Before I jump into this, just a quick reminder for everybody out there. If you lose all of your lives here, you will be taken back to the Northern Palace and will be required to go through Maze Island again. So, I would strongly recommend patience here. Enemies found here will be the Armored Stalfos, Doom Knockers, Wolf Heads, Iron Knuckles, Dragon Heads, and the dreaded Wizrobes will start to appear here. But in this game, they are fairly easy to handle, as you will just need to use a Reflect spell to knock their spells back at them. The item you will get here will be the Boots, which will help you with traversal in the overworld by allowing you to walk over certain bodies of water and lava. Now, this palace sucks, because there are rooms where the floor will start to disintegrate on you as you walk on them, and of course, dragon heads will also fly around these rooms to make your life difficult, as falling into the pits will take one of your precious lives. And, well, we know what happens when you run out of those. The boss of this palace will be Karak, who will be the easiest boss you've faced to this point, more than likely, as all you'll need to do is cast Reflect in the corner and watch his health drop. A bit of a blessing in disguise, considering how difficult it was to get to this point. After the Maze Palace, you'll head east from Nibiru and walk on the water to get to the Ocean Palace. And here you will encounter ropes, bubbles, wolf heads, dragon heads, iron knuckles, again, mace throwers, and a new enemy called Mago. These are sorcerers that will shoot fire at you and will usually only appear with other enemies. Unlike the Wizrobes, these guys can be hit with your sword, just be very careful when fighting them as they do a decent chunk of damage. The item here will be the Flute, which will unblock a passage for you on the overworld. Word of warning, this palace can be confusing to navigate, so prepare to get a little lost as you go through it. The boss of this palace will be Guma, and unlike the last boss, which was a total pushover, Guma will instead absolutely rock your shit if you are not being careful. Using the shield spell is basically needed here, as he can hit you for massive damage with his mace. You will need to hit his body as it is unguarded, but that is definitely easier said than done. But if you take your time here, you will eventually take him out. Just keep hitting him on the body and he'll eventually fall. After taking out Guma, you will head south of Nibiru and will run into the River Devil, who will not let you pass unless you play the flute. Play the flute to make him disappear and head on. This next part is a bit of a nightmare, to put it lightly. You will have 3 action scenes with Lizalfos chucking rocks at you from behind a fence, with Lizalfos blocking your path as well. This part is rough. Avoid the projectiles as best as you can and progress onward. After that, you'll head on to New Kasuto Town. In here, you'll learn the spell, which will allow you to uncover a secret in the town. And will also turn non-boss enemies into bots, making them much easier to deal with the downside of only getting bot experience from killing them. Granted, it will not work on every enemy you encounter, but it could be handy in a pinch if you are struggling against an Iron Knuckle, and because you can just use a spell and turn him into a bot. With spell in hand, you can now head to the edge of town and use it to make a building appear out of the ground. Here will be the magical key, which, just like in the original, eliminates the need for keys in the palaces. With the magical key and spell in hand, you can now head to the Hidden Palace. Living up to its namesake, the Hidden Palace is, well, hidden, and in order to unhide it, you'll need to head to the desert area nearby and play the flute in the middle of the 3 rocks, which will cause the Hidden Palace to appear. In the Hidden Palace, there will be Wizrobes, Iron Knuckles, Doom Knockers, Armor Stalfos, and Dragon Heads. Yeah, that's right, nothing new this time, just what we've already been facing beforehand. In this dungeon, you will need to go against your instincts and fall into certain pits in order to progress within this dungeon, with the need to fall in these pits also making this a bit harder to navigate, as it can be pretty easy to get lost or turned around as you're trying to figure out where to go. The cross will also be found here, amen brother, after defeating Revonock again. It's the same as it was in the 3rd dungeon, so you should be able to take them out fairly easily. Just downward thrust on the horse, and then just take out the blue Iron Knuckle. This item will make getting to the Great Palace or the final dungeon a bit easier. The boss here will be Barba, a dragon that will rise up from the lava pits and shoot fireballs at you. You will need to attack its face in order to damage it. This shouldn't be too difficult as long as you avoid its fireballs and get your hits in where you can. You should be able to take Barba down without too much difficulty. Once you make it through Death Valley, which will not be an easy task, by the way, won't really get into that, but yeah, there's a lot of brutal moments here. You'll be at the Great Palace. From this point on, if you lose all of your lives, instead of being taken back to the Northern Palace like you normally would, you will instead be taken back to the start of this palace, which is very nice considering you will probably die here quite a bit. Now this will be the ultimate test of your skill up to this point, as you will encounter Fotails, or Fakeru, a bird-like monster that will shoot fire at you that will remain on the ground, and the fire will follow you as well. Dragon Heads, King Bubbles, essentially bigger bubbles that will split into 2 normal bubbles if killed. Ropes, Fokas, another bird-like enemy that are the bane of my existence. They behave like the Iron Knuckles, but can jump greater distances, allowing them to follow you easier, and also do loads of damage, while also being able to take loads of damage before being killed as well. There's also giant bots, bigger versions of the regular bot enemy. There will be no items found here, which makes sense considering this is the last dungeon of the game. And, man, hidden passages galore here in the Great Palace, making traversal that much more confusing. And, of course, the instant death pits don't help either. But once you have made it through the gauntlet, you will be face to face with the Thunderbird. So, how's your magic looking? I sure do hope you have more than half because, just a word of warning, if you do not have enough magic to cast Thunder, you are boned, as Thunderbird cannot even begin to take damage until that spell is cast, turning it from red to blue. This, of course, is extraordinarily frustrating, especially if you are out of lives and magic, as you will need to go through the dungeon again, but end up at the door to the Thunderbird fight with enough magic to cast Thunder. But on to the fight itself. Once Thunder is cast, the bird will fly around the screen and drop fireballs on you. You can only hurt it by slashing its face, so you'll need to get ready to jump around. He will get faster and faster as the fight goes on, so you will need to be careful. Once you have finished off the Thunderbird, not so easy task, I know, you will grab the key and head into the next room. Now, you might be thinking, awesome, I was able to take Thunderbird down. Now I can finally complete the game and be done with it. and you probably feel massively euphoric right now. Well, apologies in advance, my friend, because you just walked into another boss fight. That is correct. You heard me, folks. After that last grueling fight, the game pits you against another boss. The Triforce Keeper makes Link fight his own shadow as the last boss of the game to see if he is truly worthy of possessing the Triforce of Courage. Kind of bullshit there, though, Triforce Keeper, since you definitely know what I just went through. But, whatever. Now, Dark Link will probably be the hardest or easiest fight you fight depending on how you want to go about this. Yes, there is an exploit you can take advantage of that will make taking down Dark Link super easy by just crouching in the corner and slashing at his knees. I can definitely see why someone would want to do this, considering what you just went through. And if you are playing on any version aside from the Switch version, you could get a game over here and have to restart a decent chunk of the game. And I know most folks probably wouldn't want to do all that, so definitely more power to you. No judgment here. If you want to fight him without the exploit, it will be a difficult fight, as there really is no strategy you can employ here like with the other bosses. You will just have to keep going at him until you take him down, slashing away until he inevitably falls. After Dark Link's defeat, Link will have the Triforce of Courage and make his way back to the Northern Palace, where he will wake up Princess Zelda and the curtains roll down after she calls you a real hero and they embrace. And credits. A fairly satisfying ending for what you just went through. You will also be offered to start the game over again, but this time with all your levels intact. Now, I didn't cover this very much in the main gameplay segment as I was saving it for here, but this game is difficult. Even the director said it was intentional to keep folks playing this game as it is not very long, and yes, compared to the games that would come after, this game is fairly short, with my completion time coming out to about 10 to 11 hours, which is pretty short for this series. You will die and have to start over quite a bit, and that can be massively frustrating, especially if you feel like your deaths were not fair, as you get smacked by a dragon head and fall into a death pit. I died a lot going through this game, and of course, just like with most NES games, this game gets a lot easier with repetition, but as someone who finally went through this game completely for the first time, it was difficult, and had moments that frustrated the crap out of me. This game is definitely not for everyone, but with that being said, I don't want it to seem like I did not enjoy my time with this game, because I did. Quite a bit, actually. I enjoy being challenged by the games I play, and Zelda 2 scratches that itch pretty well. And I don't know if it's just me, but I felt like this game was a bit easier to navigate, and I didn't find myself getting lost as much as I did in the original. I would still definitely recommend that you probably have a walkthrough or a guide handy as you go through this, as you will probably get stuck every once in a while, I'm sure. Now, I do know that fans that started with the later games in the series will have a much harder time getting into this, especially since this game plays way differently than what came before and what would come after it. But I do not think that should discourage you from giving this game a shot, especially with it being on the Nintendo Switch Online service, which has a rewind feature, I might add. Overall, the game is pretty fun to play, and the music is just as iconic as you would expect from the series at this point. While not being as well liked as its older sibling, this game would still see critical and commercial acclaim, with this game getting sold out at retailers at time of release. There were a few ports of this game as well. It was part of the GameCube's The Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition. It was also released as part of the classic NES series for the Game Boy Advance, which is how I played the game for the first time. It would also be on the Wii's, 3DS's, and Wii U's virtual consoles as well, with it being part of the 3DS's Ambassador program as well. It is on the NES Classic Edition, and finally saw a release on the Nintendo Switch, which is what I played it on for this video. There were no real changes between versions, with the only major change being the death screen changing from flashing colors to a solid red background to avoid seizures. There were also a few minor fixes, but nothing too groundbreaking. This game would be the last Zelda game to grace the Nintendo Entertainment System. Please join me next time as we jump into the SNES era with what is considered by many to be not only the best Legend of Zelda game, but one of the best games to ever come out, period. Next on this retrospective, I will be covering A Link to the Past. Hello everyone, and thank you for watching my video on Zelda II, The Adventure of Link. What do you think of this game? Please let me know down in the comments what your opinion on this very divisive game in this series is, as I'm genuinely curious. Other than that, please keep an eye out for the next part of this retrospective series, and please check out my other videos. And also, do the thing everyone always asks you to do. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you all in the next video. Bye-bye.